Chapter 6, Promoting Language and Literacy. It's kind of what this whole class is about, right? So, what is your role as a teacher? What does scaffolding mean? What are teachable moments? These are all things that we're going to learn about in this chapter. Hopefully, you have read the chapter. If not, go for it, okay? So let's see. 3 roles of a teacher in early childhood language education. As I've said before, your job as an early childhood teacher is to talk to, sing with, and read to your children all the time. Okay. And model appropriate language use, give children plenty of opportunities to use language, all of those things. So, you are encouraging the development of language arts and literacy as a model, a provider, and one who interacts, like I just said. As a model, you know that children do what they see, or they live what they learn, or whatever um, aphorism you want to use. But what we need to do is make sure that we as teachers are being the most appropriate role models. We're using correct grammar, right? We're using intonation and sentence patterns, and we're making language interesting and appropriate for children, okay? And then we're finding as many ways that we can to engage children in the use of language and literature. Again, children imitate and use adults as an example. And that's why often you hear children using inappropriate language, because the way that they hear inappropriate language used often catches their ear, and it's interesting, and there's a response to it. And so that's the language that they pick up on. My mom was a preschool teacher, and she had a 4-year-old who constantly used the F word in class. And she sat down with the mom to talk about it. And the mom said, well, I guess he must have picked that up from watching Saturday Night Live. Well, there's 2 problems with that. One, why is your 4-year-old watching Saturday Night Live? And 2, they don't say the F word on Saturday Night Live. Obviously, he had heard that word used in his home or in some environment and thought, wow, that's an interesting sounding word. And when people use that, they get a reaction. So I'm going to use that word. So they worked on not using that word. Teachers use explanatory talk. Teachers are constantly, and you've seen this, narrating and talking about what's going on. Oh my goodness, today we're going to learn how to cut out snowflakes because it's snowing outside, and we're going to get some snow in here and put it in our sand and water table, and we're going to make snowballs with it. And oh my, look at the way that you're molding that snow together. Molding, right? Good word. It's all icy and cold and whatever. So you're explaining what's going on. You're always talking about what's happening and using the words to describe things, because that's where kids get their vocabulary. You're using correct English language, demonstrating good listening techniques. That's one that teachers don't do enough. And we tell kids all the time, put on your listening ears or listen up, but we don't really say, what does that mean, right? And for so many things that we do with little kids, we need to be as explicit as possible. When I'm listening, I'm not talking. I'm being quiet and I'm hearing the words that my friend is saying so that I can think about how I'm going to talk back to my friend, right? So listening is a skill that we really need to teach kids, and not just constantly yell, listen up, because that doesn't tell them really what to do. Listen is a hard concept for kids because it's very abstract. How can I tell if I'm listening? How can I tell if I'm listening? Right? So one way to help kids understand listening is to play games. So one thing that you can do to have kids practice their listening is you know, the clapping game. Clap the things that I clap. So if I clap, you clap, right? So they don't necessarily know it, but when they are waiting to hear what you clap, they have to tune in and they have to listen. Or, you go, and they have to do that. They had to really focus on what you were doing there. Another one is to do something where you've got music on and you stop the music and the action stops. So it could be dancing, right? It could be freeze dancing, or it could be drawing, like we're going to draw until the music stops. And they really have to focus on when does the music stop. So making sure that you are not only demonstrating good listening techniques, right? So you are actually facing them when they're talking to you and making a point of making a physical sort of indication of listening. So, not interrupting, but making sure that they know that you are actively listening. Using expansion, that's taking the ideas that children are talking about or the words and broadening out, talking about, what else can we talk about that's related to this? Or how can we make that a bigger idea? And model thinking by speaking aloud. I know you've seen teachers do this one, right? So it's oh, I need to find my rulers. Where do I keep my rulers? And you're narrating what you're doing, you're thinking, right? And I'm going to go look over here in this drawer and see if my rulers are over there. Or speaking aloud when you're doing addition and subtraction. Well, I have one here and one here. So 1 + 1 is 2. Speaking it through, that gives them a framework and the understanding of what your thinking is. And it's good to have kids do that too, teach them to do that. You promote literacy experiences, right? You have all kinds of literacy experiences in your classroom, from books to writing utensils, all letters on your wall, all kinds of stuff. Get creative, obviously, and develop an organization system. Make sure you're organized. Provide adequate materials to motivate. Make sure you have tons of stuff in your room for kids. Use enthusiasm, right? If you're boring, they're not going to pay attention and they're not going to learn. And then plenty of opportunities for play, because play builds communication skills, taking turns, speech and friendships. You need to have so many opportunities to play during the day, because those are the ways that they actually get to practice the things that you're teaching them, right? Communication with other children, turn taking, follow the leader conversations, pretend play, some adult involvement, showing interest. So what you want to do is when you see, especially older preschoolers playing, you want to show them, oh, I like what you're doing, but not, insert yourself into their play unless they ask you to. Sometimes, oh, we're playing ice cream stand. Will you come buy an ice cream cone? Of course, you'll go buy an ice cream cone, but don't go in there and tell them how to ring up the purchases and where the cones go and all that stuff. Be a participant, not a director. When you are watching children playing, observing children playing, and watching and observing are a little bit different. Observing is much more structured and it has a goal. Like you want to know what's going on. You want to look at how their language is developing, each one. Do they have appropriate play behaviors? Are they imitating each other? Do you see leadership? Is there negotiation? Older kids are going to have those things, leadership and negotiation. Younger kids are not going to be there yet. The teacher as one who interacts, always interested in what a child says and does. It's very hard to always be especially when it's that one kid who talks about Among Us all the time and you don't really even know what he's talking about. But that's okay. You ask questions. You pretend you're interested in a way that is not phony, right? You should never be too busy to talk to a child. You should never be too busy to talk to a child. The priority of your day should be talking to children. The priority of your day should not be cleaning off the tables. You can do both at the same time sometimes, but some children need you to sit and actively engage and listen, right? You should be having daily conversations with every child. If you have 20 kids in your class, maybe you don't get a full conversation with each child every day, but you need to engage that child at least once. Say hello to them at the door, ask them a question about their day, every single one of them. And then maybe each day you have a big conversation with 4 of them, right? And then after a week, you've had big conversations with everybody. Extension and closure. So if you are having a conversation and a child seems interested in continuing but doesn't really know what to say, you jump in and say, well, what do you think about this? And then if you feel like we're done with this conversation and this child is probably done with it too, how do you close it? These are ways that you are showing them how to have a conversation, those pragmatics that we talked about. Introducing new words, relating to words they already know. So if they know the word, if they know about birds, you can start introducing different breeds, types. I don't know how birds work. Anyway, you expand on what they already know, right? And also, you use, when you come across a word in a book that is a new word, a rare word, something that is a new word that they're going to learn, you need to think about, how does that relate to them? What words could I use to understand that, to help them understand that word? Words that are conceptually similar to those they know, words that are phonologically similar to others they know. Repeated exposure, give clues to words' meaning. So whenever you're introducing new words, you need to think about, what do they already know that I can play upon? What do they already understand that I can talk about? How does that sound? So if you're reading aloud and you see frog and dog, maybe they know dog. Well, think about this. So we know that the O and the G in dog say dog. So what does FR sound like? Frog, right? And then continuing to give exposure to these new words and clues to the word's meaning. One thing that I've always done is, as I'm reading books to children, like in group time, that have a new word in it, if we come across a new word that I think people may or may not know, we write it down on an index card and we write down what the word is and we talk about the letters. And then we say, what does this word mean? And sometimes we can draw a picture of what that word means. Sometimes we have to write down what that word means, but we put it up on the wall. And you'd be amazed at how many kids can remember, even though they can't read, what that word means, or, how to relate to that word. Teachable moments are any moments when you feel like you can engage a child and have a learning opportunity, right? So you're observing children and you see, oh, they are trying to build something with blocks. Maybe I can help them. What do I think they're doing? Well, I think they're building a castle, because they were talking about castles earlier. So maybe I can find a book about castles and bring it over to the blocks area and say, hey, I see you guys are building castles. Do you want to look at this book about castles? And then ask them questions. Why are you building castles? Who lives in a castle? What do you think? And invite students to share their experiences. So it's so simple, and it should be very natural. It shouldn't be something that you feel like, oh, now I have to think about how I'm going to. It should be, oh my gosh, those kids are over there talking about castles and building a castle. What can I do to engage them and expand on what they're doing? How can we promote language? Build on those teachable moments. So if you get that castle book, maybe there are words in the castle that talk about what are the parts of a castle, and you can go through that and talk about that. Striving to provide specific and descriptive feedback. Specific and descriptive feedback is, I see what you are doing. I like what you are doing. So in this case, if you have some kids who are building gigantic castles with blocks, wow, are you guys building castles You are building those castles so tall. You've really worked hard on this. This is specific and descriptive feedback. You put so many blocks on that tower, I'm surprised it hasn't fallen over. How did you figure out how to get all those blocks on there? These are open-ended questions, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, but this is specific and descriptive feedback. Going over and seeing that they built a very tall tower and saying, good job, is not specific and descriptive feedback. Good job should be rarely used. Good job doesn't tell a kid anything, right? But often we use it as an acknowledgement of what they're doing and sort of positive feedback, but it has no real value to a child, right? Because they don't know what's good job. Unless you say, wow, you built that castle or you built that tower really tall. You used so many blocks. You're so good at balancing them. How did you know to put the big ones on the bottom and the small ones on the top? Did anybody help you with this? These are all ways to provide specific and descriptive feedback. Scaffolding is the next step. So this is helping them move on to the next thing. That what I just did was a responsive conversation. I asked a bunch of open-ended questions. Hopefully the child will be able to answer me. When they're answering me, they're not just using those words. They have to think about what their process was. And so this is an important way of them learning how to think and learning how they think, right? Teacher interactive styles transmission. This is teachers talking at kids, right? Children acquire knowledge through teacher talking, sharing books, explaining classroom events and experiences. This is more focused on the teacher talking, the kind of traditional model of teaching. An interpretive style, is children are getting the information and thinking about it and interpreting it themselves, and the teacher is helping them understand that, talking that through. Listening is vital in this part. Styles to promote language growth, stressing language connections, talking about words and language all the time, right? So we've talked about how language, we think, develops innately in a way. But the more explicit you are about it, the more depth and richness children have in their understanding of language. So when you, and this is especially important in 3s, 4s, and 5s, because this is the part where they're learning to read, they're learning how words work and how everything fits together. And so it's important to talk about words, and it's important to talk about letters, and it's important to talk about books. Accepting approximations. This is, well, it's not exactly, the answer that you've given me is not exactly what I was looking for, or it doesn't exactly answer the question, but it's an interesting way of looking at it, and it is an answer. Handling interruptions. Interruptions are okay, and they're going to happen. And the worst book times or group times that I've ever experienced are the ones where a teacher won't do anything until everyone stops talking. When you're dealing with 3s, 4s, and 5s, chances are, if you have a class of 15 3s, 4s, and 5s, or 20, no one's ever going to stop talking. If you wait until that time, everybody is going to be super frustrated. So what you need to do is you need to make yourself so interesting that they will pay attention. There may still be talking, and that's okay. It's not developmentally appropriate to assume that 3s, 4s, and 5s can sit for 20 minutes and not talk, right? They need to move, they need to talk, they need to express themselves, and we need to make space for that. So, handling interruptions. Maybe it's a someone keeps talking and you need to just say, "You know what, Josiah? I understand that you have a lot to say, and if you just let me get through this part of what I was going to say, then we can talk about that." Or, "Josiah, you and I have an appointment later in the blocks area so that we can talk about all the things that you want to talk about right now." Um, Using sequential approaches to instruction, making sense of we're building on these skills, we're building on these developmental areas, dealing with children's past experiences. What do they know? What are the words that they already know? What are the experiences that they've already had? How can you relate new words and new experiences to what they've already is built into them, if that makes sense? Teacher as balancer. This one is important, and it's very hard sometimes to be balanced because you have to be balanced with every child in the classroom all at once, right? So that means that you need to support everybody in your classroom and you talk, but you don't overtalk and you listen, right? And you remain responsive. So it means that you can't just stand in one corner of your classroom and yell out commands all day long. It means that you need to spend time with each child, supporting them, talking to them, listening to them. And just because you listen in group time doesn't mean that you're hearing what everyone has to say. So, making sure that you're balanced between teaching the whole class and teaching each child is probably an important part of that as well. Oh my gosh, there's so much to say about all this stuff, and it's really important. So make sure you read through this chapter really well.